Good evening. Welcome to Business Prime Time. Let's begin with some news that's been long awaited. The Reserve Bank of India today issued final guidelines for new bank licenses, which say entities notwithstanding which sector they're from and both from the private and the public space shall now be allowed to apply for a bank license. Our financial policy editor Ira Dugal joins in with the fine print. Ira.
After a wait of nearly 3 years, the Reserve Bank of India has finally put out the guidelines for new banking licenses. It was almost 3 years to the date that Pranab Mukherjee talked about the need for new banks in the budget of 2010-11. Since then, the process has gone through various ups and downs, and finally the guidelines. This is what the guidelines actually say. They put down the eligibility criteria as private entities which are owned and controlled by residents, public sector entities and existing NBFCs, which basically leaves the field wide open. Corporate entities can now apply for a banking license. Even corporate entities linked to sensitive businesses like real estate or brokerage can technically go ahead and apply for a banking license. But the RBI is going to apply a very tough criteria known as the fit and proper criteria in deciding who gets a license. They define that by saying that these entities must have a past track record of sound credentials and integrity. They must have a successful track record of 10 years, and they will seek feedback from other regulators, the enforcement department, the CBI, the IT department, to judge whether these are fit and proper entities. In the previous draft, they had actually taken out entities linked largely to real estate and capital markets. This time, there's no such classification, but there's a very clear quote where the RBI says that promoter and promoter group businesses should not potentially put the bank and the banking system at risk on account of group activities such as those which are speculative in nature and subject to high volatility, which that tells you, if you read between the lines, maybe the RBI would still be uncomfortable with real estate or broking linked businesses, but that is up to the RBI's judgment. The corporate structure for new banks, it would have to be through a non-operative financial holding company. This would hold the bank and other financial service entities. It would also be ring-fenced from other group activities, and that's going to be an important criteria. The RBI says they have to be satisfied about that ring-fencing and also about their ability to actually supervise the bank. Exposure norms are important. They say that the holding company must not have exposure to any group entity, or actually for that matter must keep an arm's length approach with the promoter group, key customers of the promoter group and key suppliers of the promoter group. Capital and shareholding along expected lines, minimum capital is at 500 crore. The holding within the holding company has to be 40% at least for a period of 5 years. If you're above 40%, you have to bring it down to 40% in 3 years. Shareholding has to be brought down to 20% over 10 years and 15% over 12 years. Listing is mandatory within 3 years. Foreign shareholding has been restricted to 49% in these banks, at least for the first 5 years. Rural exposure is something that's important because the idea behind these licenses was financial inclusion. So these banks will have to have 25% of branches opened in unbanked rural areas. Finally, how is this process going to play out? Take your application, go to the Reserve Bank of India, they'll screen those applications, they'll pass it on to a high-level committee which will look at it, give its recommendations to the RBI, and then the RBI will take a final call on who does or does not get a license. It would probably be a process that would last anywhere between 6 to 12 months.
All right, and that was Ira Dugal getting us the fine print. We'll quickly, in fact, also listen in to D.K. Mittal, the former banking secretary, on what really the finance ministry is making of that, and then we'll get you a reaction from all the license hopefuls. Listen in.
I think it's a correct format because, as a country, the two issues we need to remember that we do not have many persons who have 500 crores of capital. So if we take out large categories which can have good entrepreneurs or bad entrepreneurs, then we are taking out everybody who is even a good entrepreneur in that category is being taken out. It is basically the credentials of the person, that is the promoter, which is most important in banking. And those entities which would be applying would be one which are operating in India for some time. So therefore RBI would have fair means to assess their credentials and then apply a fit and proper criteria on that basis.
And in fact, our finance ministry sources also telling us that the RBI is likely to issue around 4 to 5 new banking licenses, and that the process is likely to in fact be completed by the end of this calendar year. IFCI, of course, being a PSU till now at least, is also eligible to apply for banking licenses. Let's also listen in to some reactions coming in from license hopefuls that we've been speaking to through the course of this evening.
what I'm delighted is that the emphasis by RBI, particularly on good governance, on sound track record, and on integrity on one side, and simultaneously has talked about rural presence, has talked about inclusive area, and that delights me most because Mahindra Finance is a company which qualifies on both these criteria.
There is no restriction in terms of the nature of the business, but whosoever is fit and proper would qualify. Ultimately, it would be in the judgment of central bank and the committee that who are people who are capable of taking the inclusion agenda forward, and they should be given the license. So we will surely be looking forward of studying the guidelines in deeper detail and gearing up and thinking of how do we apply. As far as we are concerned, we would contemplate converting our NBFC into a bank business, so that has adequate amount of capital in any case.
We welcome these new guidelines. They are a very welcome step and very positive and pragmatic guidelines, and they would certainly help strengthen the financial inclusion in the country and also deepen our financial sector. So we welcome these guidelines. After all, somewhere they have to start, although 500 crore according to me in today's context is rather low, but probably they don't really want to raise the entry barrier, so they kept it 500 crore, but obviously you need more capital in banking business.
Okay, that clearly is the big story of the day, and we're going to try and get you more reactions live later in the show, but let's move on for now. And in fact, in what could come in as somewhat of a setback for those of us who earn more than 20 lakh rupees per annum.